Daniel Cavell wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days, the fabric stained beyond recognition from years of oil changes and engine repairs. The fluorescent lights of the auto shop flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor littered with tools and car parts. It was nearly 6 in the evening on a Tuesday, and the last customer had picked up their sedan 20 minutes ago. He should have closed up by now, locked the heavy metal door, and headed home to his small apartment, where a microwaved dinner and silence waited for him. But Daniel stayed, finding reasons to organize toolboxes that were already organized, to sweep floors that were already clean. Going home meant confronting the emptiness, and at 35 years old, he had become an expert at avoiding that particular confrontation. 3 years. It had been 3 years since his last date, since he had allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would look at him and see something worth keeping. The breakup had been predictable, almost scripted. She had used words like emotionally unavailable and not ready for commitment, but what she really meant was simpler and more cutting. He was not enough. He had never been enough. Not in high school, when he was the skinny kid with hand-me-down clothes and a mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Not in his 20s, when he finally filled out, grew into his frame, but still carried that invisible mark of being from the wrong side of town. And apparently not now, when he owned his own business and had become the kind of man women looked at twice on the street. The bell above the shop door chimed, startling him from his thoughts. Daniel looked up to see Natalie Bellamy standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, and a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Natalie had been his best friend since middle school, back when they were both outcasts trying to survive the brutal social hierarchy of public education. She had stuck by him through every humiliation, every rejection, every moment when he felt invisible to the world. "You're still here," Natalie said, stepping inside and letting the door swing shut behind her. "Daniel, it's Tuesday evening. The shop closed half an hour ago. Just finishing up some paperwork," he lied, gesturing vaguely toward the cluttered desk in the corner where invoices and work orders sat in organized chaos. Natalie raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. She walked over to where he stood, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the concrete. "Right, paperwork. Is that what we're calling it now?" She paused, her expression softening. "Danny, you can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Hiding. Living like a ghost in your own life." She reached out and touched his arm, her voice gentle but firm. "When was the last time you went out? And I don't mean to the parts store or to grab takeout. I mean actually went somewhere, did something, talked to someone who wasn't a customer. Or me?" Daniel pulled away, turning back to the workbench and unnecessarily rearranging a set of wrenches. "I'm fine, Nat. I'm just busy. The business is growing. I have more customers than I can handle, and you're lonely," Natalie interrupted. "You're so lonely it hurts to watch." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hands stilling on the cold metal of the wrench he was holding. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that he was perfectly content with his solitary existence. But Natalie had always been able to see through his defenses, had always known when he was lying to himself. "I have a friend," Natalie said after a moment, her tone shifting to something more careful, more calculated. "Her name is Lauren. She's a nurse at the General Hospital downtown. She's been through some things, and she's kind of in the same place you are. Stuck, afraid to try again." Daniel shook his head immediately, already knowing where this conversation was heading. "No, Nat, no. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but just meet her," Natalie pressed. "One time, Come to my place for coffee this Saturday afternoon. 2 o'clock. It's casual. No pressure. If you two don't hit it off, fine. But you owe it to yourself to at least try. What's the worst that could happen? Everything, Daniel thought. The worst that could happen was that he would let himself hope again. And hope was the most dangerous thing a man like him could carry. Hope made you vulnerable. Hope set you up for disappointment. Hope reminded you that no matter how much you changed on the outside, the scared kid from the wrong side of town was still there on the inside, waiting to be rejected all over again. But Natalie was looking at him with those eyes that had seen him at his worst, and somehow still believed he deserved better. And maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe he couldn't spend the rest of his life hiding in his auto shop, avoiding the possibility of connection because he was afraid of pain. Fine, Daniel said finally, the word coming out rougher than he intended. Saturday, 2 o'clock. But if this goes badly, you're buying me lunch for a month. Natalie's face lit up with a smile so bright it almost hurt to look at. Deal. And Danny? Wear something nice. Not the work uniform with your name embroidered on it. She left after that, the bell chiming her exit, and Daniel was alone again with the silence and the smell of motor oil. He looked down at his hands, at the calluses and small scars that marked years of working with engines and metal. These were good hands, capable hands, hands that could fix almost anything mechanical. But they had been empty for so long, unused to the warmth of another person's touch, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to hold someone. Saturday came faster than Daniel expected. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror that morning, staring at his reflection with a critical eye. The man looking back at him was almost unrecognizable from the boy he used to be. Somewhere between 18 and 35, his body had filled out, his shoulders had broadened, his jawline had sharpened. He had grown into his features in a way that turned heads, that made women smile at him in grocery stores and coffee shops. But none of that had ever felt real to him, never felt like enough to overcome the fundamental belief that he was somehow deficient, somehow unworthy of the attention he received. He showered, shaved, and pulled on a dark blue button-down shirt that Natalie had bought him for his last birthday, claiming he needed at least one piece of clothing that doesn't smell like a garage. His jeans were clean, dark, relatively new. He ran a hand through his hair, still damp from the shower, and tried to calm the nervous energy thrumming through his chest. The drive to Natalie's house took 15 minutes through suburban streets, lined with modest homes and mature trees. It was early September, and the first hints of autumn were beginning to show in the yellowing edges of leaves and the slight chill in the morning air. Daniel pulled his truck into Natalie's driveway at exactly 2 o'clock, because punctuality was one of those things his mother had drilled into him since childhood. If you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time. He sat in the truck for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to talk himself out of the panic rising in his throat. This was just coffee, just a casual meeting. Nothing to be terrified about, but his body didn't seem to understand that message, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The front door opened before he could make a decision about whether to actually get out of the truck. Natalie appeared on the porch, waving at him with an expression that was equal parts encouraging and threatening. "Get in here," her face said, "or I will come drag you inside myself." Daniel climbed out of the truck, his legs feeling slightly unsteady beneath him. He walked up the path to Natalie's front door, each step feeling heavier than the last. The house was a small ranch-style home with a well-maintained lawn and flower beds bursting with late summer blooms. Natalie had always had a gift for making spaces feel warm and welcoming, a talent that Daniel envied. "You look terrified," Natalie said as he reached the porch, her voice quiet enough that no one inside could hear. "I am terrified," Daniel admitted. "Good. That means you still care about something." She squeezed his shoulder once, then opened the door wider. "Come on, she's already here." The interior of Natalie's home was exactly as Daniel remembered from his last visit months ago. Comfortable furniture in earth tones, family photos covering every available wall space, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen, natural light poured through large windows, making the living room feel bright and airy. And sitting on the couch, her posture rigid and her hands clasped tightly in her lap, was a woman with long auburn hair that caught the sunlight like strands of copper wire. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost painful. Her features delicate but defined, her eyes a striking shade of green that stood out even from across the room. But there was something else in her expression, something guarded and wary, that he recognized immediately because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. This was a woman who had been hurt, who had built walls around herself brick by careful brick, who was sitting on this couch not because she wanted to be here, but because someone had convinced her to try one more time. "Daniel, this is Lauren Moore," Natalie said, her voice warm and welcoming as she gestured between them. "Lauren, this is Daniel Cavell, the friend I've been telling you about." Lauren stood up, her movements careful and measured, and extended her hand. "Nice to meet you," she said, her voice soft but controlled. Daniel stepped forward and took her hand, feeling the coolness of her palm against his. Her grip was firm but brief, and she pulled away quickly, as if the contact had burned her. "Nice to meet you too," he managed, his own voice sounding strange to his ears. "I'd just made a fresh pot of coffee," Natalie announced, already moving toward the kitchen. "Lauren takes hers with cream and sugar. Danny takes his black. I'll be right back." Nice, and just like that, they were alone in the living room, standing several feet apart, the silence stretching between them like an unspoken agreement to keep their distance. Daniel gestured awkwardly toward the couch. "Do you want to sit?" Lauren nodded and returned to her seat, choosing the far end of the couch and tucking herself into the corner as if trying to make herself smaller. Daniel sat on the opposite end, maintaining a respectful distance that suddenly felt like miles. He searched desperately for something to say, some way to break the uncomfortable silence, but his mind had gone completely blank. "So," Lauren said finally, her eyes fixed on her hands, "Natalie tells me you're a mechanic." "Yeah, I own an auto shop on the east side. Been doing it for about 10 years now." The words came out stiff and formal, like he was reading from a script. She said, "You're a nurse?" "General Hospital. I work in the medical surgical unit. Mostly post-op patients, some trauma cases." Her responses were equally mechanical, devoid of any real emotion or enthusiasm. Another silence fell, this one even more oppressive than the first. Daniel could hear Natalie moving around in the kitchen, the clink of ceramic mugs, the sound of liquid being poured. He wished she would come back, that she would fill this terrible void with her easy conversation and natural warmth. But part of him knew that Natalie was giving them time, space, to figure out how to talk to each other without her as a buffer. "How long have you known Natalie?" Lauren asked, still not looking at him directly. "Since middle school. We both didn't quite fit in, I guess. Found each other in the library one day, and just sort of stuck together after that." Daniel paused, searching for more words to fill the space. "She's been my best friend for over 20 years now. I don't know what I would have done without her." For the first time, Lauren's expression softened slightly, something almost like recognition flickering across her features. "That's nice, having someone who's known you that long, someone who sees you." The way she said those last words, "sees you," carried a weight that Daniel immediately understood. This was someone who felt invisible, who felt like the world looked right through her, or, worse, looked at her and saw only whatever label or judgment they had assigned to her. Natalie returned then, carrying a tray with 3 mugs of coffee and a small plate of cookies that looked homemade. She set the tray on the coffee table and handed out the mugs with practiced efficiency. "There we go. Nothing like good coffee and conversation on a Saturday afternoon." The 3 of them settled into a rhythm of stilted small talk, with Natalie doing most of the heavy lifting. She asked questions, told stories, filled in the gaps when Daniel and Lauren's attempts at conversation stalled out. Daniel found himself responding in short sentences, hyper-aware of every word he said, terrified of saying something wrong or stupid, or revealing too much about the loneliness that had become his constant companion. Lauren was equally guarded, answering questions but never volunteering additional information, never opening up beyond the bare minimum required for politeness. She kept her arms wrapped around herself, her body language screaming discomfort, despite her attempts to appear relaxed. They were two people going through the motions, checking off boxes, fulfilling an obligation to a well-meaning friend, while counting down the minutes until they could politely escape. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The conversation had moved to safe topics like the weather and upcoming holidays, surface-level exchanges that required no real vulnerability or risk. Daniel sipped his coffee slowly, using it as something to do with his hands, and tried not to think about how badly this was going. He had known it would be awkward, had expected some level of discomfort, but this was worse than he had imagined. This was two broken people sitting in the same room, both too damaged to reach across the distance between them. Then Natalie's phone rang, the sound sharp and intrusive in the quiet room. She pulled it from her pocket, glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted to something apologetic. "I'm so sorry. I have to take this. It's work. Emergency situation with one of my projects." She was already standing, moving toward the hallway that led to her bedroom. "I'll be just a few minutes, I promise. You two get to know each other." And then she was gone, her voice fading as she disappeared down the hall, and Daniel and Lauren were truly alone for the first time. The silence that descended was different now, heavier, charged with all the things neither of them knew how to say. Daniel set his coffee mug down on the table, the ceramic making a soft clicking sound against the wood. Lauren did the same, her hands immediately returning to her lap, where she twisted her fingers together in a nervous gesture. "I'm sorry," Lauren said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not very good at this." "At what?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious. "At pretending, at small talk, at acting like this isn't the most uncomfortable thing I've done in years." She finally looked at him directly, her green eyes meeting his, and Daniel saw something raw and honest there that caught him off guard. "Natalie means well, but I think we both know this isn't working." Daniel should have agreed, should have taken the easy out she was offering, thanked her for her time and left with his dignity intact. But something in her honesty, in her willingness to acknowledge the elephant in the room, made him pause. "No," he said slowly, "it's not working. But maybe that's because we're both trying too hard to be, I don't know, normal? Whatever that means." Lauren's lips quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't entirely sad either. "Normal? Right. I don't think I remember what that feels like." "Me neither," Daniel admitted. "I've been hiding for 3 years, just working, going home, working some more. Natalie dragged me here because she's worried I'm going to turn into one of those guys who lives alone with 20 cats and forgets how to have a conversation." "I don't have cats," Lauren said, "but I understand the impulse. It's easier, safer. You can't get hurt if you don't let anyone close enough to hurt you." The vulnerability in her words resonated through Daniel's chest like a bell being struck. Here, finally, was someone who understood. Someone who had built the same walls, who had retreated from the world for the same reasons. "Yeah," he said softly, "exactly that." They sat in silence for a moment, but this silence was different from the uncomfortable gaps that had plagued their earlier conversation. This was a silence of recognition, of two people realizing they might not be as alone as they thought. Lauren took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling, and Daniel saw her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Something that usually ends these things before they even start?" "You don't have to," Daniel said quickly, sensing that whatever she was about to say carried enormous weight. "I know, but I want to. Because if we're going to sit here pretending we might try this, you should know now Not later when it might actually matter. She swallowed hard, her eyes dropping back to her hands. Nobody wants to date me. Nobody wants a relationship with me. And I'd rather you know why now than waste your time. Daniel's heart began to pound, not from attraction or excitement, but from the recognition of someone about to expose their deepest wound. Lauren, just let me do this, she interrupted. Please. Her hands moved to the hem of the long-sleeved cardigan she wore over a simple tank top. Her fingers gripped the fabric, hesitating for just a second before she made a decision that clearly terrified her. In one quick motion, she pulled the cardigan up and over her head, tossing it onto the arm of the couch. Daniel's entire body went still, every muscle locked. His breath stopped in his chest. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. She sat there in a thin, strapped tank top, her right arm completely exposed from shoulder to wrist. The skin was a landscape of trauma, of healing that had required brutal intervention. Burn scars covered every inch, the tissue raised and shiny in some places, deeply textured in others, patterns of skin grafts creating a patchwork of different tones and textures. The scarring extended from her wrist, crawling up her forearm, wrapping around her elbow, consuming her upper arm, and disappearing beneath the strap of her tank top, where it clearly continued across her shoulder. Daniel couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare. His breathing changed, became deeper, more deliberate, as his brain tried to catch up with what his eyes were showing him. He blinked once, twice, his jaw tensioned, muscle working beneath skin. The seconds stretched out, each one feeling like an eternity. 5 heartbeats of absolute silence, where nothing existed except the sight of her arm and the devastating vulnerability of what she had just done. He saw her watching him, saw the fear in her eyes as she waited for his reaction, for the inevitable moment when he would look away or make an excuse to leave. This was clearly a test she had administered before, a way to weed out the people who couldn't handle the reality of her body, of her history. This was her saying, "Here I am, all of me, the parts I hide under long sleeves and careful clothing choices. Can you handle this? Because most people can't." Daniel's hands flexed in his lap, his entire body screaming to do something, say something, but his throat felt completely closed. His eyes moved from the scars to her face, taking in the tears that were starting to form at the corners of her eyes, even though she was clearly fighting to keep them from falling. She looked like someone who had just jumped off a cliff, waiting to see if she would hit the ground, or if somehow, impossibly, she might fly. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, Daniel moved, but he didn't pull back, didn't recoil, didn't do any of the things Lauren clearly expected. Instead, he leaned forward slowly and reached for the cardigan she had thrown aside. His movements were careful, deliberate, gentle in a way that seemed to surprise even him. He picked up the soft fabric and held it in his hands for a moment, then extended it toward her, not covering her arm in disgust, not hiding what he couldn't bear to see, but offering it to her with a respect that said, "You don't have to expose yourself like this for me. You don't have to prove anything. You are enough exactly as you are." "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel said, and his voice came out low and rough, thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "And I think if I stood up and walked out of here right now, that would be the thing I'd regret for the rest of my life." Lauren stared at him, her green eyes wide with disbelief, as if his words had been spoken in a language she didn't understand. The cardigan hung between them, draped over his extended hand, an offering she seemed afraid to accept. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and Daniel could see the pulse point in her neck hammering visibly beneath her skin. She had expected rejection. She had armored herself for disgust, for polite excuses, for the careful extraction that came when someone realized they had bitten off more than they could chew. What she had not expected was this. "You don't mean that," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. "You don't even know me. You don't know what happened, or how I got these, or what it means to be with someone who—" "You're right," Daniel interrupted gently, still holding the cardigan toward her. "I don't know your story yet, but I'd like to, if you want to tell me." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I'm not running. I'm not leaving. Whatever you think you saw in my face just now, whatever you think I was feeling, it wasn't what you're afraid it was." Lauren's hands trembled as she reached for the cardigan, her fingers brushing against his as she took it. The contact lasted only a second, but it felt electric, charged with the weight of what had just passed between them. She didn't put the cardigan back on immediately. Instead, she held it in her lap, her scarred arm still visible, still exposed to the afternoon light streaming through Natalie's windows. "What were you feeling then?" she asked, her voice steadier now, but still cautious, still testing the waters to see if his words matched his intentions. Daniel leaned back slightly, giving her space, but his eyes never left hers. "Honestly, I was trying to process, trying to understand what you had been through. And then I was thinking about how much courage it must have taken to show me that, to trust a complete stranger with something you clearly protect with everything you have." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he had carried since childhood. "I wasn't disgusted, Lauren. I was in awe." A single tear escaped down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly with her left hand, as if ashamed of the display of emotion. People say things like that. In the beginning, they say they can handle it, that it doesn't matter, that I'm brave or strong or whatever words make them feel like good people. And then reality sets in. They realize what it actually means. The stares from strangers, the questions from people who think they have a right to know, the fact that I can't just be normal. "I never said I could handle it," Daniel replied honestly. "I have no idea what this means or what challenges come with it, but I know I want to try to understand. That has to count for something." Before Lauren could respond, they heard Natalie's voice in the hallway, still on her phone, but clearly wrapping up her conversation. Lauren moved quickly, pulling the cardigan back over her shoulders and adjusting it to cover her arms completely. By the time Natalie returned to the living room, the evidence of what had just transpired was hidden again, buried beneath layers of fabric and carefully constructed normalcy. "I am so sorry about that," Natalie said, slipping her phone back into her pocket. "Work crisis averted, but it took longer than I expected." She looked between Daniel and Lauren, her expression shifting from apologetic to curious. Something in the air had changed. She could feel it, could see it in the way they were looking at each other now, a connection that hadn't existed before she left the room. "Did I miss something?" "No," Lauren said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "We were just talking." Natalie's eyes narrowed slightly, her maternal instincts clearly sensing that more had happened than a simple conversation. But she didn't push. "Well, I'm glad you two had some time alone. Sometimes that's what it takes to really get to know someone." She settled back into her chair, picking up her now lukewarm coffee. "So, what do you think? Should we order some lunch? I know a great Thai place that delivers." The rest of the afternoon unfolded with a surprising ease that shocked both Daniel and Lauren. With the weight of her revelation behind them, with the worst of her fears exposed and not met with the rejection she expected, Lauren began to relax in increments. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Her responses became less guarded. She even laughed once at a story Natalie told about a mishap at her office. The sound bright and genuine, and so unexpected that it made Daniel's chest ache. They ordered food. They ate together around Natalie's small dining table, passing containers of pad thai and spring rolls between them. The conversation flowed more naturally now, touching on safer topics like favorite movies and childhood memories, and the peculiar habits of their mutual friend. Daniel found himself watching Lauren when she wasn't looking, noticing small things about her. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the slight upturn of her lips when something amused her, even if she didn't fully smile, the careful way she held her fork always in her left hand, her right arm still hidden beneath the cardigan despite the warmth of the afternoon. It was nearly 5 o'clock when Lauren finally stood up, announcing that she needed to get home. She had an early shift at the hospital the next morning, she explained, and needed to prepare her uniform and try to get some decent sleep. Daniel stood as well, suddenly reluctant to let this afternoon end, to return to the silence of his apartment and the uncertainty of whether he would ever see her again. "I'll walk you to your car," he offered, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. Lauren looked surprised, but nodded. "Okay, thank you." They said their goodbyes to Natalie, who hugged them both with an enthusiasm that suggested she knew something significant had happened, even if she didn't know the details. Then Daniel and Lauren were outside, walking down the driveway toward a modest sedan parked at the curb. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street, and somewhere nearby a dog barked rhythmically, a steady metronome marking the passage of time. Lauren stopped when they reached her car, turning to face him. Her hand rested on the door handle, but she didn't open it immediately. "Thank you," she said softly, "for staying, for just being decent." "You don't have to thank me for basic human decency," Daniel replied. "That should be the bare minimum. You'd be surprised how rare it actually is." She looked down at her feet, then back up at him. "Can I ask you something? And will you promise to be honest?" "Of course." "Why didn't you leave when I showed you? When you saw what I really look like underneath all this?" She gestured vaguely at her covered arms. "Most people can't handle it. They think they can, but when they actually see it, when they realize this isn't something that's going away or getting better, they find reasons to disappear. So why didn't you?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, searching for words that would convey the truth without sounding rehearsed or false. "Because I saw courage," he said finally. "I saw someone who had been through something terrible and survived. And I saw someone who was willing to be vulnerable with a complete stranger because she wanted honesty more than she wanted comfort. That's not something I could walk away from." Lauren's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. "I was in a fire," she said, the words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. 4 years ago, my apartment building. My parents were visiting me that weekend. They were staying in my spare bedroom. The fire started in the unit below mine. Some electrical issue with old wiring. By the time the smoke alarms went off, it was already bad. I was closer to the front door. I got out. They didn't. Daniel felt his heart constrict in his chest. "Lauren, I'm so sorry. I tried to go back in," she continued, her voice distant, as if she was reliving the memory even as she spoke. "The firefighters had to physically restrain me. I could hear my mother screaming. I could hear her, Daniel. And I couldn't do anything. I just stood there on the sidewalk and listened to my mother die." "That wasn't your fault," Daniel said firmly. "You know that, right? That wasn't your fault. My brain knows that. But the rest of me," she shook her head. "I spent 14 months in and out of the hospital. Surgeries, skin grafts, physical therapy, pain that made me wish I had died in that fire with them. And the whole time, all I could think was that I should have been faster, should have gotten them out, should have done something different. I'm the one who survived, and I don't even know why. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this life I kept when they lost theirs." Daniel didn't have words adequate for the depth of her pain, for the weight of survivor's guilt she carried. So instead of speaking, he did something that surprised both of them. He reached out and took her left hand in his, the one she used for everything, the one that hadn't been touched by the flames. His grip was gentle but firm, his calloused mechanic's hands rough against her smooth skin. "You're supposed to live," he said quietly. "However that looks, whatever that means. You're supposed to keep going, even when it hurts, even when you don't understand why. That's what you're supposed to do." They stood there for several seconds, hands clasped between them, the weight of her confession hanging in the cooling evening air. Lauren looked at their joined hands as if she couldn't quite believe they were real, as if she expected him to pull away at any moment. "I should go," she said eventually, though she made no move to release his hand or open her car door. "Can I see you again?" Daniel asked, the question escaping before his usual fear and self-doubt could shut it down. "Maybe for coffee or dinner or just whatever you'd be comfortable with." Lauren hesitated, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. The part of her that wanted to say yes, fighting against the part that had learned to protect herself by pushing people away. "I don't know if that's a good idea," she said finally. "Why not?" "Because this, right here, right now, this is the good part. This is before you really understand what it means, before you see how people stare, before you realize that being with me means explaining my scars to every curious stranger, before you figure out that I wake up with nightmares and I can't stand the smell of smoke, and there are days when I can barely look at myself in the mirror." She pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm giving you an out, Daniel. Take it. Save us both the inevitable heartbreak." "No," he said simply. She blinked at him, clearly not expecting such a direct refusal. "No? No. I don't want an out. I want a chance. Just one. Just to see if this, whatever this is, might be worth the risk." He paused, then added, "And for what it's worth, I have my own scars. They're just not visible like yours. But they're there, and they make me just as scared as you are." Lauren studied his face for a long moment, searching for signs of dishonesty or false bravado. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied something in her because she slowly nodded. "One chance. But I'm warning you now, I'm probably going to be terrible at this. I haven't dated anyone since before the fire. I don't know how to do this anymore." "That makes two of us," Daniel said with a small smile. "I haven't been on a date in 3 years. We can be terrible at it together." The ghost of a smile crossed Lauren's face, the first real one he had seen from her all afternoon. "Okay, together then." They exchanged phone numbers, fumbling with their devices like teenagers experiencing their first crush. Daniel programmed her contact information into his phone with a care that suggested it was something precious, something not to be lost. When they finally said goodbye and Lauren climbed into her car, Daniel stood on the curb and watched her drive away, his heart doing something it hadn't done in years. It was hoping. Against all logic and past experience, against every lesson he had learned about protecting himself from disappointment, his heart was daring to hope. He turned and walked back toward Natalie's house, intending to thank her and head home. But she was already waiting for him on the porch, her arms crossed and a knowing expression on her face. "So," she said as he approached, "that looked like it went better than the first 20 minutes suggested." "Yeah," Daniel admitted. "It did. Are you going to see her again?" "I hope so." We exchanged numbers. Natalie's smile was brilliant and triumphant. "I knew it. I knew you two would connect if you just gave it a chance." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "She's been through a lot, Danny. More than most people could handle. If you're going to do this, you need to be sure. She doesn't need someone else who's going to bail when things get hard." "I know," Daniel said. "She told me. About the fire. About her parents." Natalie's face softened with sadness. "Then you understand what you're signing up for. This isn't going to be easy." "I don't need easy," Daniel replied. "I need real. And she's the most real person I've met in years." That night, lying in his bed in the darkness of his small apartment, Daniel stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of the afternoon in his mind. The way Lauren had looked sitting on that couch, guarded and afraid. The devastating vulnerability of her showing him her scars. The strength it had taken for her to tell him about the fire, about her parents, about the guilt she carried like a second skin. And underneath all of that, the connection he had felt, the recognition of someone who understood what it meant to be damaged and scared, and still trying to figure out how to move forward. His phone buzzed on his nightstand, pulling him from his thoughts. He reached for it, squinting at the bright screen in the darkness. A text message from an unknown number. "It's Lauren. I couldn't sleep. Just wanted to say thank you again. For today. For not running. It meant more than you probably realize. Daniel's fingers moved across the screen, typing out a response. I'm glad I stayed. Get some rest. You have an early shift tomorrow. 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing. Then, good night, Daniel. Good night, Lauren. He set his phone back on the nightstand and closed his eyes, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was just a text message, just a simple exchange of words in the darkness, but it felt like something more. It felt like the beginning of something he hadn't dared to imagine was still possible. The next week unfolded with a slow, careful dance between them. Text messages at odd hours, Daniel learning the rhythm of Lauren's shift schedule at the hospital. Good morning texts before she went to work. Good night messages when she finally got home. Exhausted and running on too little sleep. Conversations that started with safe topics and, gradually, tentatively, began to venture into deeper territory. Daniel told her about growing up poor, about being the invisible kid in school, about the shame he had carried for years over things that were never his fault. Lauren told him about the months of physical therapy, about the pain that still flared up sometimes in her arm, about the way she avoided mirrors and photographs, and anything that forced her to confront the reality of her changed body. On Thursday evening, Daniel was working late at the shop, elbow deep in the engine of a sedan that had been making concerning noises, when his phone rang. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered without checking the caller ID, expecting it to be a customer or parts supplier. Daniel? Lauren's voice came through, and something in her tone made him immediately alert. Are you busy? Never too busy for you. What's wrong? I had a really bad day. Lost a patient. Young guy. Motorcycle accident. We did everything we could, but sometimes everything isn't enough. Her voice cracked slightly. I know we barely know each other, but I didn't know who else to call. Natalie's out of town for work, and I just can't be alone right now. Daniel was already moving, grabbing his keys from the workbench. Where are you? At home. But Daniel, you don't have to. Text me your address. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He made it in 15. Driving through evening traffic with a single-minded focus. Lauren's apartment building was a newer construction on the west side of the city, all modern lines and landscaped grounds. She had texted him the unit number, and he took the stairs 2 at a time to the 3rd floor, his heart pounding not from exertion but from concern. She answered the door still in her scrubs, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face pale and drawn. The cardigan she wore covered her arms completely, but he could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her body. "Hi," she said softly, stepping back to let him in. "Hi," he replied, entering her space for the first time. The apartment was small but tidy, decorated in neutral tones with minimal personal touches. It felt like a place someone existed in but didn't truly live in. A temporary shelter rather than a home. "I'm sorry for calling you like that," Lauren said, closing the door behind him. "I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. I'm glad you called." Daniel turned to face her fully. "Do you want to talk about it? About what happened today?" She shook her head, fresh tears starting to slide down her cheeks. "I don't want to talk. I don't want to think. I needed to not be alone." So Daniel stayed. He sat with her on her couch, maintaining a respectful distance, but making his presence known. He didn't try to fix her pain or offer empty platitudes about how everything happens for a reason. He simply existed beside her, a steady presence in the chaos of her grief, and let her cry until she had no tears left. At some point, exhausted from her shift and the emotional weight of the day, Lauren fell asleep sitting up, her head gradually tilting until it rested against Daniel's shoulder. He froze, afraid to move and wake her, and spent the next 2 hours sitting perfectly still, his arm going numb but refusing to adjust his position. This trust she had shown him, this vulnerability of falling asleep in his presence, felt sacred somehow. He would not betray it for something as trivial as his own comfort. When Lauren finally woke, disoriented and embarrassed, the apartment was dark except for the city lights filtering through the windows. She pulled away quickly, apologizing profusely for falling asleep on him, for keeping him there, for being such a mess. "You're not a mess," Daniel said gently. "You're human. You had a terrible day and you needed someone. That's not weakness, Lauren. That's just being alive." She looked at him in the dim light, her expression difficult to read. "Most people would have run, would have found an excuse to leave, but you stayed." "I told you I wasn't going anywhere," he reminded her. "I meant it." Something shifted in her eyes then, some decision being made. She stood up, turning on a small lamp that cast a warm glow across the room. "Come here. I want to show you something." She led him down a short hallway to a closed door at the end. Her hand rested on the doorknob for a moment, hesitating, before she opened it and flipped on the light switch. The room beyond was small, clearly meant to be a second bedroom, but it had been converted into something else entirely. Daniel stepped inside and felt his breath catch. Every available surface was covered with sculptures, clay and ceramic pieces in various stages of completion. But these weren't decorative objects or pretty figurines. These were raw, emotional expressions of pain and survival. Hands molded with textured surfaces that mimicked scar tissue. Faces emerging from rough clay, half-formed and anguished. Abstract shapes that suggested flames and destruction and rebirth. "I started making these about a year after the fire," Lauren explained, standing in the doorway. "My therapist suggested I find a creative outlet for the emotions I couldn't verbalize. This is what came out." Daniel moved slowly through the room, examining each piece with reverence. The level of skill and emotional depth was staggering. These weren't the works of an amateur dabbling in art therapy. These were powerful, professional quality sculptures that spoke to profound suffering and equally profound strength. "Lauren, these are incredible," he said, turning back to look at her. "Have you ever shown them to anyone? Sold them? Exhibited them?" She shook her head quickly. "No, they're too personal, too revealing. I make them for me, not for anyone else. I understand that, but I hope someday you'll consider sharing them. There are other people out there who have been through trauma, who carry scars they can't see. Your work could help them feel less alone." Lauren was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. "Maybe," she said finally. "Someday, but not yet." They returned to the living room, and Daniel knew he should leave, should let her get the rest she clearly needed. But he found himself reluctant to go, to sever this connection that had formed between them tonight. "Can I take you to dinner?" he asked. "This weekend, if you're free. A real date." Lauren bit her lip, that familiar hesitation crossing her face. But this time, the fear didn't win. "Okay," she agreed. "Saturday night, but somewhere quiet. I don't do well with crowds." "I know just the place," Daniel promised. He left her apartment with a strange mixture of emotions swirling in his chest. Concern for her pain, admiration for her strength, and something else. Something warmer and more dangerous. Something that felt suspiciously like the early stages of falling for someone. Saturday night arrived wrapped in the crisp promise of early autumn. Daniel picked Lauren up at 7 o'clock, his truck freshly washed for the occasion. She emerged from her building wearing dark jeans and a flowing blouse with long sleeves, her hair loose around her shoulders, and makeup applied carefully to accentuate her striking eyes. She looked beautiful and terrified in equal measure. The restaurant Daniel had chosen was a small Italian place, tucked away on a quiet side street, family-owned and intimate. Only 12 tables, most of them occupied by regulars who came for the authentic food and warm atmosphere. The owner, an older woman named Rosa, greeted Daniel by name and showed them to a corner booth that offered privacy and soft lighting. Dinner was easier than their first meeting at Natalie's house, the conversation flowing with less effort. They talked about everything and nothing, favorite books and terrible movies, and childhood pets. The kind of getting-to-know-you exchanges that felt simultaneously mundane and deeply important. Daniel made Lauren laugh with a story about a disastrous attempt to fix his own truck when he was 16, and the sound of her genuine laughter made something in his chest expand and ache. They were finishing dessert, sharing a slice of tiramisu between them, when Lauren's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and her expression immediately darkened. She turned the phone face down and pushed it away, but not before Daniel saw the name on the screen. Lydia Stevenson. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," Lauren said too quickly. "Just someone I haven't talked to in a while trying to reconnect." Daniel didn't push, but he noticed how the joy had drained from her face, how her walls had started to rebuild themselves in the span of a single text message. They finished their meal in a slightly more subdued atmosphere, and he drove her home wondering what had caused such a dramatic shift in her mood. He walked her to her door, and they stood in the hallway outside her apartment, neither quite ready to say goodnight. "I had a really good time tonight," Lauren said. "Thank you for dinner, and for being patient with me." "I had a good time too," Daniel replied honestly. "Can I see you again?" Before Lauren could answer, her phone buzzed again, and again. She pulled it out with a frustrated sigh, and Daniel saw multiple text messages lighting up the screen, all from Lydia Stevenson. "I'm sorry," Lauren said, her voice tight. "I need to deal with this. Good night, Daniel." She disappeared into her apartment before he could respond, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, confused and concerned about what had just happened. He walked back to his truck slowly, a nagging worry settling into his stomach. Something was wrong. Something had changed, and he had no idea what it was, or how to fix it. Monday morning arrived with an unseasonable chill, the kind that made Daniel pull a jacket on over his work shirt as he headed to the shop. The weekend had ended on a strange note, Lauren's abrupt goodbye still echoing in his mind. He had texted her Sunday afternoon, a simple message asking if everything was okay, but her response had been brief and distant. Just tired from work. Talk soon. No warmth, no invitation to continue the conversation. Just polite words that felt like a door closing. The morning passed in a blur of routine maintenance and oil changes. Daniel moved through the familiar motions automatically, his hands knowing what to do even when his mind was elsewhere. It was nearly noon when a silver Mercedes pulled into the shop's lot, expensive and out of place among the practical sedans and trucks that usually filled his customer roster. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and walked out to greet the driver, professional courtesy overriding his curiosity. The woman who emerged from the Mercedes was striking in a way that demanded attention. Blonde hair styled in perfect waves, designer clothes that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and a smile that was equal parts confident and calculated. It took Daniel's brain a full 3 seconds to place her, to connect this polished woman with the girl from his past. "Daniel Cavell," she said, her voice warm and familiar in a way that made his stomach tighten with unease. "I heard through the grapevine that you owned this place. I had to see for myself if it was true." "Lydia," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "It's been a long time. 15 years, give or take." She leaned against her car, her posture casual, but her eyes assessing him with obvious interest. "You look good, Daniel. Really good. I barely recognized you from the pictures Jenna showed me." Jenna, their mutual friend from high school, who apparently still kept tabs on everyone from their graduating class. Daniel made a mental note to have a conversation with Jenna about sharing his information without permission. "What can I do for you? Is there something wrong with your car?" Lydia laughed, a sound that probably charmed most people but set Daniel's teeth on edge. "The car is fine. I just wanted to see you. Catch up. Maybe grab coffee if you have time." Every instinct Daniel possessed was screaming at him to say no, to maintain professional distance and send her on her way. This was Lydia Stevenson, the girl who had looked right through him in high school, who had dated the quarterback and the class president and every other guy who had status and visibility. The girl who had made him feel invisible, inadequate, not worth her time or attention. And now she was standing in his shop, flirting with him like those years of dismissal had never happened. I appreciate the offer, Daniel said carefully, but I'm pretty busy today. Maybe another time. Come on, Daniel. Just 20 minutes. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here. I'll buy. She touched his arm lightly, her fingers lingering on his bicep, in a way that was clearly intentional. I really have been wanting to talk to you. To apologize, actually. That caught his attention despite his better judgment. Apologize for what? For being a shallow, stupid teenager who didn't see what was right in front of her. Lydia's expression shifted to something that looked like genuine regret, though Daniel couldn't tell if it was authentic or performed. I was cruel to a lot of people back then, you included, and I'd like the chance to acknowledge that, and maybe make amends. Daniel hesitated. Part of him wanted to refuse, to protect the boundaries he had carefully constructed. But another part, the part that still carried the wounds of that invisible boy from high school, wanted to hear what she had to say, wanted the acknowledgement that yes, she had hurt him, that her dismissal had mattered. 20 minutes, he agreed. Let me tell my assistant I'm stepping out. The coffee shop was exactly where Lydia said it would be. A trendy place with exposed brick and overpriced lattes. They found a table near the window, and Daniel nursed a black coffee while Lydia sipped something complicated with foam and caramel drizzle. For the first few minutes, she kept the conversation light, asking about his business and his life with what seemed like genuine interest. I really am impressed, Daniel, she said, stirring her drink absently. You built something real, something yours. That takes guts and hard work. It's just an auto shop, Daniel replied, uncomfortable with the praise. It's more than that. It's independence. It's not needing anyone else to validate you or give you permission to succeed. She paused, her expression becoming more serious. I married young, 23, to exactly the kind of guy you'd expect. Rich, successful, the kind of man my parents approved of. We divorced last year. Turns out success doesn't mean much when someone treats you like a trophy instead of a person. Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded and let her continue. When I saw your name come up in conversation, when Jenna showed me pictures of you at that charity event last month, I barely recognized you. You grew into yourself, Daniel. You became the kind of man I should have paid attention to back then, instead of chasing status and popularity. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. I wanted to apologize for being so shallow, for not seeing you. You deserved better than how I treated you. The apology should have felt validating, should have soothed some of that old hurt. But instead, Daniel felt a strange emptiness. This moment he had imagined countless times as a teenager, where the beautiful girl finally noticed him and regretted overlooking him, felt hollow now, because he wasn't that boy anymore. And more importantly, his heart was somewhere else entirely. I appreciate you saying that, Daniel said, gently extracting his hand from hers. But Lydia, that was 15 years ago. We were kids. You don't owe me an apology for teenage behavior. Maybe not, she conceded, but I'd still like the chance to get to know the man you became. Maybe we could have dinner sometime? Catch up properly? There it was. The invitation he would have killed for at 17. And now, at 35, it meant nothing, less than nothing. Because across town, there was a woman with auburn hair and devastating green eyes who had shown him her scars and trusted him with her pain. A woman who made this polished, perfect woman in front of him feel like a pale imitation of something real. I'm seeing someone, Daniel said, the words feeling right as soon as he spoke them. Even though he and Lauren hadn't defined what they were, even though their relationship was barely a week old and fragile as spun glass, it felt more real than anything Lydia was offering. Lydia's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. Oh, well, that's wonderful. I'm happy for you. She didn't sound happy. She sounded disappointed, maybe even a little insulted that he had turned her down. If things don't work out, though, you have my number. Jenna gave it to you, right? Daniel hadn't given Jenna permission to share his information, and he certainly hadn't asked for Lydia's number, but he simply nodded, wanting this conversation to end. "Thanks for the coffee, Lydia. It was good to see you." He left before she could prolong the interaction, walking back to his shop with a strange mixture of relief and unease. He had done the right thing. He knew that. But something about the encounter left him feeling unsettled, like he had stepped into a trap he didn't fully understand yet. The rest of Monday passed without incident. Daniel threw himself into work, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of diagnosis and repair. But his mind kept drifting to Lauren, to the way she had pulled away Saturday night, to the distant tone of her text messages. He wanted to call her, to hear her voice, and reassure himself that whatever was happening between them was still there. But he also didn't want to push, didn't want to be the kind of man who demanded constant reassurance and attention. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected visitor to the shop. Daniel was under a truck, replacing a worn serpentine belt, when he heard voices above him. Male voices, engaged in conversation that carried the easy familiarity of old friends catching up. "I'm telling you, man, it's over," one voice said. "She saw the messages. Nothing physical happened, but she says I crossed a line." "You did cross a line," the second voice responded, firmer and less sympathetic. "You don't give luck to bad luck, brother. An ex shows up in your DMs, you shut that down immediately. You don't engage. You don't entertain it. You definitely don't let it go on for weeks." Daniel's hands stilled on the wrench he was holding. He recognized these voices now. Two regular customers who had brought their sedan in for an oil change. They were standing near the waiting area, visible from where Daniel lay beneath the truck, if he tilted his head just right. "It was just conversation," the first man protested. "We were catching up. There was nothing wrong with it." "That's what you tell yourself. But here's what your wife saw. Her husband having long, intimate conversations with a woman he used to sleep with. Conversations he was hiding from her. Doesn't matter if nothing physical happened. You opened a door that should have stayed locked, and now you're surprised she's walking out? I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Nobody ever means for it to happen. But it happens anyway, because people get stupid. They get nostalgic. They start thinking about roads not taken instead of appreciating the road they're on. And by the time they realize what they're doing, the damage is done." Daniel lay motionless beneath the truck, the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He thought about Lydia showing up at his shop, about the coffee they had shared, about the invitation for dinner that he had declined, but that she had left open. He had done nothing wrong. He had been honest about seeing someone. He had maintained appropriate boundaries. But would Lauren see it that way? If she found out that his ex-crush from high school had tracked him down, had touched his arm and asked him out, would she understand? Or would she see it as confirmation of her deepest fears that he would eventually leave her for someone easier, someone whole? The realization settled over him like cold water. This wasn't about what he had or hadn't done. This was about perception. About the fact that Lydia's appearance in his life, regardless of his response to it, represented a threat to the fragile trust he and Lauren were building. And if Lauren had somehow found out about it, if Lydia had reached out to her, or if someone had seen them at the coffee shop and mentioned it, then that would explain the sudden distance, the closed-off responses, the way she had pulled away Saturday night. Daniel finished the belt replacement mechanically, his mind racing through possibilities and worst-case scenarios. As soon as the customers left, he pulled out his phone and called Lauren. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He tried again an hour later. Same result. By the time Wednesday arrived with no response to his multiple calls and text messages, Daniel's concern had transformed into something closer to desperation. Thursday afternoon, he closed the shop early and drove to the hospital where Lauren worked. He knew her shift schedule by now, knew she would be finishing around 4 o'clock. He waited in the parking lot, watching the employee entrance, until he saw her emerge with a group of other nurses, all of them in scrubs and looking exhausted from a long shift. "Lauren!" he called out, climbing out of his truck. She stopped, her entire body going rigid when she saw him. The other nurses continued toward their cars, glancing back with curiosity, but giving them space. Lauren walked toward him slowly, her expression carefully neutral, in a way that terrified him more than anger would have. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice flat. "You weren't answering my calls. I was worried. I've been busy." "Too busy to send a single text message? Lauren, what's going on? What happened?" She looked away, her jaw working as if she was trying to decide how much to say. "I think we should stop this. Whatever this is, it's better to end it now before it gets more complicated." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. "What? Why? I don't understand. Saturday night was good. We had a good time, and then suddenly you just shut down. What changed?" "Nothing changed," Lauren said, but her voice cracked slightly on the words. "Everything is exactly as it always was. I told you this would happen. I told you that you would realize what being with me actually means, and you would want out. I'm just making it easier for both of us." "That's not what's happening here," Daniel insisted. "I don't want out. I want to understand why you're pushing me away." "Sue," Lauren finally looked at him directly, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. "Lydia Stevenson contacted me. Did you know that? She found me on social media somehow, probably through Natalie, and she sent me a very friendly message. Wanted to introduce herself. Said she was an old friend of yours who had recently reconnected." Her voice was shaking now, emotion breaking through the carefully constructed walls. "She told me you two had coffee, that you talked about old times, that she apologized for not seeing what a great guy you were back in high school." Daniel felt his blood run cold. "Lauren, that's not what happened. Or rather, it did happen, but not the way you're making it sound. She showed up at my shop uninvited. I gave her 20 minutes out of basic courtesy, and I told her I was seeing someone. I turned down her invitation for dinner. I did everything right." "Did you?" Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "Because from where I'm standing, this is exactly what I knew would happen. A beautiful woman from your past shows up, someone without all my baggage and complications, and suddenly you have choices, options, the ability to see what you're giving up by being with me." "I'm not giving up anything," Daniel said desperately. "Lydia means nothing to me. Less than nothing. Whatever teenage crush I had on her died years ago. It has nothing to do with you and me." "But it does," Lauren insisted. "Don't you see? This is always going to be my life. People are always going to look at you and wonder what you're doing with me. Why the handsome, successful mechanic is with the scarred nurse who can't even wear short sleeves in public. And eventually, you're going to start wondering the same thing." "That's not fair," Daniel shot back, his own frustration finally breaking through. "You don't get to decide how I feel. You don't get to tell me what I'm going to think or do in the future. You're scared. I get that. But you're using Lydia as an excuse to do what you always planned to do anyway. Run before I have a chance to hurt you." "And what if I am?" Lauren's voice rose, drawing glances from people passing through the parking lot. "What if running is the smartest thing I can do? Because I have been through hell, Daniel. I have survived things that should have killed me, and I'm barely holding myself together most days. I don't have the energy to also survive you leaving me when you finally realize I'm too much work." They stood there facing each other in the parking lot, both breathing hard, both on the edge of something that felt like it could either break them apart or forge them into something stronger. Daniel took a step closer, his voice dropping to something quieter but no less intense. "I grew up being told I wasn't enough," he said. "Not smart enough, not rich enough, not good enough. I spent my entire adolescence being invisible to girls like Lydia because I didn't have the right clothes or the right background or the right anything. And you know what? I believed it. I believed I was fundamentally deficient, that there was something wrong with me that I could never fix." He paused, making sure she was listening. "That skinny, invisible kid from high school? He doesn't exist anymore. He died somewhere between 18 and 35. And the man I am now doesn't care what Lydia Stevenson thinks or wants. He doesn't care what anyone thinks except one person. You, the woman who was brave enough to show me her scars on the first day we met. The woman who trusted me with her worst memories. The woman who makes me feel seen for the first time in my entire life. Lauren's tears were falling freely now, her walls crumbling in real time. But what if you're wrong? What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake? Then that day happens, and we deal with it, Daniel said. But you don't get to make that decision for me today based on fears about tomorrow. You don't get to protect me from a hurt that hasn't happened yet by inflicting a different hurt right now. I'm scared, Lauren whispered, the admission seeming to cost her everything. I know. I'm scared too. I'm terrified, actually. But I choose you anyway. Every single day, I choose you. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, and when she didn't pull away, he cupped her face in his hands. That woman from my past means nothing. She's a ghost, Lauren. But you're real. You're here. And you're who I want. You really told her you were seeing someone? Lauren asked, searching his face for any sign of deception. I did, before she even finished her invitation. Because the truth is, I am seeing someone. Someone incredible who makes me want to be brave enough to try again. Lauren closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for assuming the worst, for not talking to you before deciding you were going to leave. I've been left so many times, and it's always because of this. She gestured to her covered arm. Because eventually people realize that dating me means explaining me to everyone, defending their choice, justifying why they're with the damaged girl instead of someone normal. First of all, screw normal, Daniel said, with enough vehemence to make her eyes snap open. Normal is boring. Normal is beige. You are extraordinary. And second, I don't need to justify my choices to anyone. The only person whose opinion matters is yours. And if you can look me in the eye and tell me you genuinely don't want to try this, don't want to see where this could go, then I'll walk away right now. But if you're running because you're scared, then I'm asking you to be brave. Just a little longer. Just enough to give us a real chance. Lauren was quiet for a long moment, emotions warring across her face. Fear and hope, self-protection, and the dangerous desire to trust. Finally, she nodded, emotion small but significant. Okay, she breathed. Okay, one more chance. But Daniel, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If your feelings change, if you meet someone else, if you wake up one day and realize this is too hard, you have to tell me. Immediately. Don't string me along out of pity or obligation. I'd rather have honest hurt than comfortable lies. I promise, Daniel said solemnly. Complete honesty. Even when it's hard. Even when it's uncomfortable. They stood there in the hospital parking lot as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, holding each other with a desperation that spoke to how close they had come to losing something that was barely formed. Daniel pressed a kiss to Lauren's forehead, gentle and reverent, and felt her arms wrap around his waist, clinging to him like he was an anchor in a storm. Come to dinner at my place tomorrow night, he said quietly. Let me cook for you. Let me show you that this is real, that I'm not going anywhere. Lauren pulled back slightly to look up at him. You cook? I cook exactly 3 dishes really well, but you'll have to take your chances on which one you get. The ghost of a smile crossed her face, the first he had seen from her in days. Okay, tomorrow night. They parted with a gentleness that felt like a new beginning, like they had weathered their first real storm and somehow come out the other side still standing. Daniel drove home with his heart doing complicated things in his chest, equal parts relieved and terrified by how much he had revealed, how vulnerable he had allowed himself to be. That night, he texted Natalie. Did you give Lydia Stevenson Lauren's contact information? The response came quickly. What? No! Why would I do that? I barely remember Lydia from high school. What's going on? She contacted Lauren, told her about having coffee with me. Oh, Danny, that's not good. How did she even find Lauren? I don't know, but she did, and she almost destroyed something important. Almost? We talked. We're okay. But Nat, I need you to be more careful about who you share information with. Lauren is private for good reasons. I need to protect that privacy. Of course. I'm sorry. I would never intentionally put her at risk. You know that. Daniel did know that. But he also knew that small towns and high school connections had a way of spreading information faster than anyone intended. He would need to be more vigilant, more protective of what he and Lauren were building. Friday evening arrived with a crisp clarity that made everything feel sharper, more vivid. Daniel spent the afternoon preparing his apartment, cleaning surfaces that were already clean, arranging and rearranging furniture that was fine where it was. He was nervous in a way he hadn't been nervous in years, desperate to make this evening perfect, to show Lauren that his words in the parking lot hadn't been empty promises, but genuine commitment. He settled on making his mother's recipe for chicken parmesan, one of the 3 dishes he could execute reliably. The apartment filled with the smell of garlic and tomato sauce, warm and homey in a way that made him think of childhood dinners around his mother's small kitchen table. Lauren arrived at 7 o'clock exactly, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a soft sweater that somehow made her eyes look even greener. She had left her hair down, and there was a nervousness to her movements that matched his own. They were both trying, both reaching across the distance fear had created, both hoping that this fragile thing between them could survive the tests that life threw at it. Dinner was easier than either of them expected. They talked and laughed and slowly let their guards down in increments. Daniel told her about his mother, about growing up in a house where love was abundant even when money wasn't. Lauren shared memories of her parents, careful at first, but gradually opening up about the people they had been before the fire took them from her. After dinner, they moved to the small living room, sitting on the couch with the kind of careful distance that spoke to their awareness of each other, of the electricity that hummed between them. Lauren accepted a glass of wine and curled up in the corner of the couch, her posture more relaxed than Daniel had ever seen it. "Thank you for this," she said softly, "for not giving up on me, for fighting for us, even when I was trying to push you away." Thank you for letting me fight," Daniel replied, "for being brave enough to try again." They talked late into the evening, the conversation meandering through topics both deep and trivial. At some point, Lauren's carefully constructed barriers crumbled completely, and she found herself telling him things she had never told anyone. About the nightmares that still plagued her, about the guilt that consumed her some days, about the way she sometimes looked in the mirror and couldn't recognize the person staring back at her. And Daniel listened. He didn't try to fix her or minimize her pain. He simply bore witness to it, holding space for her grief and fear without judgment or discomfort. When she finished, exhausted from the emotional exposure, he reached out and took her hand. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said quietly. "And I know you probably don't feel strong most of the time. But surviving what you survived, carrying what you carry, and still showing up every day to help other people as a nurse? That's strength, Lauren. Real strength." She squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. They sat like that for a long time, hands intertwined, the silence between them comfortable and full of unspoken understanding. When Lauren finally left that night, she paused at the door and looked back at him. "I'm going to try," she said, "to trust this. To trust you. It's going to be hard, and I'm probably going to spiral sometimes, but I'm going to try. That's all I'm asking," Daniel replied. "Just keep trying. We'll figure out the rest as we go." He watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the night, and felt something settle in his chest. Something that felt dangerously close to hope, mixed with determination. They weren't perfect. They were both carrying damage from their pasts. But maybe that was exactly why they fit together. Two people who understood brokenness, who could look at each other's scars, visible and invisible, and see not weakness, but survival, not damage, but strength forged in fire. The weeks that followed unfolded with a rhythm that felt both natural and miraculous to Daniel. He and Lauren settled into a pattern of carefully constructed normalcy, building something fragile but real between the gaps of their individual lives. They texted throughout the day, small messages that served as anchors. Good morning wishes before her hospital shifts, photos of particularly challenging engine repairs that made her laugh, late-night conversations when neither of them could sleep, when the darkness made it easier to say things that daylight might have scared away. Their dates remained deliberately low-key, quiet dinners at Daniel's apartment, where they could exist without the weight of strangers' stares, walks through less crowded parks where Lauren could wear short sleeves without feeling exposed to judgment, movie nights on his couch where they gradually closed the physical distance between them, moving from opposite ends to the middle, from carefully maintained space to comfortable proximity. It was mid-October when Natalie called Daniel with what she described as an opportunity that's perfect for both of you. He listened with growing interest as she explained about a community center renovation project happening across town. The center served children who were burn survivors, providing recreational therapy and support services. They needed volunteers to help with the physical renovation work, installing new equipment, and creating safe play spaces designed specifically for kids dealing with trauma and physical limitations. I already signed up, Natalie said, and I think you should bring Lauren. It might be good for her, being around other people who understand what she's been through. Daniel was hesitant to suggest it at first, knowing how carefully Lauren controlled her exposure to situations that might force her to confront her scars publicly. But when he mentioned it during dinner that Thursday evening, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, exactly, but something closer to longing. Kids? She asked quietly. They specifically work with children who've been burned? Yeah. It's a therapeutic recreation center. Adaptive sports equipment, art therapy spaces, counseling services. The whole renovation is being funded by donations and staffed by volunteers. Daniel paused, watching her face carefully. We don't have to go if you're not comfortable. I just thought maybe it would be something we could do together. Lauren was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the rim of her water glass. I've never been around other burn survivors, she admitted. After I got out of the hospital, I did a few months of group therapy, but I couldn't handle it. Seeing other people's pain, hearing their stories, it was too much on top of my own, so I stopped going. I've been isolated with this for 3 years. This would be different, Daniel suggested gently. It's not therapy. It's just helping build a space for kids. You wouldn't have to talk about your experience if you didn't want to. You could just be there. When is it? Saturday. 9 in the morning until whenever we finish. Probably early afternoon. Lauren nodded slowly, something resolving in her expression. Okay, I'll go. But Daniel, I need to warn you. I don't know how I'm going to react. Being around kids with burns, seeing their injuries, it might bring up things I'm not ready to deal with. Then we'll leave, Daniel said simply. No judgment, no pressure. We go, we see how you feel, and if it's too much, we walk away. Saturday morning arrived cool and clear, the autumn air carrying the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke that made Lauren tense slightly as they drove to the community center. Daniel noticed but didn't comment, simply reached over and took her hand, letting her squeeze his fingers with a grip that bordered on painful. The center was a modest building in a working-class neighborhood, its exterior showing signs of wear that the renovation aimed to address. The parking lot was already half full when they arrived, volunteers unloading tools and materials from trucks and vans. Natalie spotted them immediately and jogged over, her enthusiasm infectious, despite Lauren's obvious nervousness. You came, Natalie said, pulling Lauren into a quick hug. I'm so glad. Come on, they're doing orientation in the main hall. Inside, the center hummed with activity. About 30 volunteers had shown up, ranging from teenagers fulfilling community service requirements to retired contractors offering their professional expertise. The project coordinator, a woman named Susan with kind eyes and efficient energy, explained the day's goals. They would be installing rubber flooring in the main recreation area, building custom storage units for adaptive equipment, and painting the walls with bright, child-friendly colors. Daniel and Lauren were assigned to the painting crew, which meant working in one of the smaller therapy rooms off the main hallway. The space would become an art room, Susan explained, where kids could engage in creative expression as part of their healing process. Lauren's hands shook slightly as she tied her hair back and accepted a paint roller, but she said nothing, simply focused on the task in front of her. They worked in companionable silence for the first hour, the rhythmic motion of painting oddly meditative. Other volunteers moved in and out, asking questions about paint coverage and technique. Daniel kept stealing glances at Lauren, monitoring her emotional state, ready to suggest they leave at the first sign of distress. But she seemed okay, focused and present, gradually relaxing into the simple physicality of the work. It was nearly 11 o'clock when the first children arrived. Susan had mentioned that some of the center's regular participants would be visiting during the renovation, excited to see the changes being made to their space. Daniel heard them before he saw them, their voices echoing down the hallway with the particular energy that only children possessed. High-pitched laughter, questions fired in rapid succession, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum. Lauren froze mid-stroke, her paint roller suspended in the air. Daniel set his own roller down and moved closer to her, positioning himself so he could see her face. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Before she could answer, 3 children appeared in the doorway of the art room, ranging in age from about 6 to 10 years old. The oldest, a girl with half her face covered in healing skin grafts, peered inside with open curiosity. "Are you making our art room pretty?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight lisp from the way the scars pulled at her mouth. "We're trying," Daniel replied gently, very aware of Lauren's rigid posture beside him. "What's your favorite color? We want to make sure we get it right." "Purple," the girl said immediately. "But Tommy likes blue, and Sarah likes yellow. So maybe all of them?" The other 2 children, a boy with compression garments covering both arms, and a younger girl with visible scarring on her neck and shoulder, crowded into the doorway alongside their friend. They were staring not at Daniel, but at Lauren, their eyes fixed on the portion of her right arm that was visible below the short-sleeved shirt she had chosen to wear for the physical work. Daniel tensed, ready to intervene if the attention became too much for her. But before he could say anything, the oldest girl spoke again, her voice matter-of-fact and innocent. "You got burned too," she observed. Not a question, but a statement of recognition. "Was it scary?" The room fell silent. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. This was the moment Lauren had been dreading, he realized. Not the work itself or being at the center, but this confrontation with innocence that saw her scars not as something shameful, but simply as a shared experience. Lauren lowered the paint roller slowly, setting it in the tray with a care that suggested she was buying herself time to think. She turned to face the children fully, and Daniel saw her take a deep, steadying breath. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than usual but remarkably steady. "Yes," she said simply. "It was very scary." "Were you brave?" the younger girl asked, Sarah if Daniel remembered correctly. Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I don't think I was brave while it was happening. I was just scared. But after, when I had to do all the hard things to get better, maybe I was brave then." The boy, Tommy, stepped closer, his small face serious. "Did it hurt a lot?" "It did," Lauren admitted. "It hurt more than anything I'd ever felt. But you know what? It hurt less and less as time went on. And now most days, it doesn't hurt at all." "That's what my doctor says too," the oldest girl chimed in. "She says one day I won't even remember what it felt like to hurt all the time." "I'm Megan, by the way." "I'm Lauren," she replied. And Daniel heard something shift in her voice, something opening up. "And this is Daniel. He's helping me paint your art room. Are you a princess? Sarah asked suddenly, her question delivered with the absolute seriousness that only small children could muster. My mom says people who survive fire are like princesses who had to fight a dragon. Lauren's hand flew to her mouth, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob escaping. Daniel watched as she knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with the children, no longer trying to hide her scarred arm, but instead holding it out slightly, as if to say, "Yes, this is part of me, and it's okay for you to see it." "I never thought of it that way," Lauren said, her voice thick with emotion. "But yeah, I guess I am kind of like a princess who fought a dragon, a fire dragon. And you know what? So are all of you. You're all dragon fighters." The children's faces lit up with delight at this reframing of their trauma. Megan immediately launched into a story about her own dragon fight, describing her accident with the innocent vocabulary of childhood, but the undeniable weight of real experience. Tommy and Sarah added their own stories, all three of them talking over each other in their eagerness to share with someone who understood in a way most adults couldn't. Daniel stepped back, giving Lauren space with the children, and found himself profoundly moved by what he was witnessing. This woman who hid herself under long sleeves and avoided mirrors was kneeling on the floor of a half-painted room, surrounded by children with visible scars and compression garments, and she was glowing. Not despite her trauma, but somehow because of it, because she could offer these kids something precious, the visible proof that survival was possible, that life continued after the dragon. Susan appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of animated children. She assessed the scene quickly, her expression softening. "I see you've met our art room ambassadors," she said with a warm smile. "Kids, why don't we let these nice people get back to painting? You can come back later and see the finished product." The children protested, but allowed themselves to be herded away, Megan turning back at the last moment to call out, "Thank you for being a dragon fighter, Lauren." After they left, the art room fell into a profound silence. Lauren remained kneeling on the floor, her hands pressed to her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Daniel moved to her immediately, dropping down beside her and pulling her into his arms without asking permission. She collapsed against him, years of held-back emotion finally finding release. "I didn't know," she gasped between sobs. "I didn't know it could feel like this. Showing them, letting them see, having them see me not as broken, but as someone who understands." "You were incredible," Daniel murmured into her hair, holding her tightly. "Lauren, what you just gave those kids, that moment of connection and understanding, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." They stayed like that for several minutes, Lauren crying out grief and fear and something that might have been the first stirrings of acceptance. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but there was a lightness to her expression that Daniel had never seen before. "I want to do more of this," she said, her voice hoarse but determined. "I want to work with these kids, not just today, but ongoing. I want to use my art, my sculpting, to help them process their trauma the way it helped me. Then we'll make it happen," Daniel promised. "Whatever you need, however I can support that, we'll figure it out together." They returned to painting with a renewed energy, the walls gradually transforming from dingy beige to a cheerful combination of purple, blue, and yellow that would make 3 specific children very happy. Other volunteers popped in throughout the day, commenting on their progress, and Daniel noticed that Lauren no longer tensed when people approached. She had rolled up her sleeves completely, her scarred arm fully visible, and she seemed almost oblivious to the occasional curious glances. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the art room was finished. The walls glowed with color, the new flooring had been installed, and custom shelving units waited to be filled with art supplies. The volunteers gathered in the main hall for a final briefing, and Susan made a point of thanking everyone individually for their contribution. "I want to especially acknowledge Lauren," Susan said, catching her off guard. She spent extra time with our kids today, and I watched her give them something invaluable. The visible reminder that healing is real, that survival is not just possible, but can be beautiful. If you're interested, Lauren, we would love to have you back, maybe even regularly." Lauren's face flushed with emotion, but she nodded. "I'd like that. I'd really like that." The drive home was quiet but comfortable, both of them processing the day's events in their own ways. Daniel reached over and took Lauren's hand, and she intertwined their fingers without hesitation. They were stopped at a red light when she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I think today changed something for me," she said. "I've spent 3 years hiding, believing that my scars made me unlovable, unemployable, everything. And today, I realized that maybe they don't have to be something I hide. Maybe they can be something I use to help other people." "They already are," Daniel replied. "Just by existing, by surviving, by showing up today, you helped those kids in ways you probably won't ever fully understand." The light turned green, and they continued on, the city passing by in blurs of autumn color. When they reached Lauren's apartment, she surprised him by asking him to come up. Not for anything specific, she explained, but just because she didn't want to be alone, didn't want this feeling of connection and possibility to dissipate into the solitude of her empty apartment. Inside, she made tea while Daniel stood at her window, looking out over the city lights beginning to flicker on as dusk approached. When she joined him, handing him a mug, they stood side by side in comfortable silence until Lauren spoke again. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made Daniel tense slightly. "And I need you to just listen until I'm done, okay?" "Okay," he agreed, setting his tea down and giving her his full attention. Lauren took a deep breath. "I've been seeing a therapist again. Started about 2 weeks ago, right after our fight in the hospital parking lot. I realized that I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep letting my fear and trauma sabotage every good thing that tried to happen in my life. So I found a new therapist who specializes in burn survivors and PTSD, and I've been working with her twice a week." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "One of the things we've been working on is my tendency to catastrophize, to assume the worst possible outcome, and then make decisions based on that assumption. Like with Lydia. The therapist helped me see that I was so convinced you would leave me for her that I tried to leave you first as a form of self-protection. Which is insane, but it's what I do." "It's not insane," Daniel interjected gently. "It's self-preservation based on past experiences. Maybe, but it's also not fair to you. It's not fair to make you constantly prove yourself because I can't trust that good things can happen to me." She turned to face him fully. "So I'm working on it, on trusting, on believing that you mean what you say when you tell me you're not going anywhere. It's hard, and I'm probably going to mess up sometimes, but I'm trying." Daniel reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "I'm proud of you, for going back to therapy, for being willing to do that work. That takes courage." "I'm tired of being scared," Lauren admitted. "I'm tired of letting the fire win. It took my parents. It took my body. But I won't let it take my future, too." They stood there in the fading light of her apartment, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air. And in that moment, Daniel understood something fundamental. This woman in his arms, this survivor who had been tested by fire and grief and emerged scarred but unbroken, was the bravest person he had ever met. Not because she didn't feel fear, but because she felt it deeply and kept moving forward anyway. "Stay," Lauren whispered. "Tonight, just to sleep. I don't want to be alone." "I'll stay," Daniel promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They fell asleep on her couch that night, tangled together under a soft blanket, the television playing something neither of them were watching. It was intimate without being sexual, vulnerable without being uncomfortable. It was the kind of closeness that came from genuine trust, from two people choosing to be present for each other in the smallest, most mundane ways. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to their relationship. Lauren began volunteering at the community center every Saturday, eventually proposing and launching monthly art therapy workshops using clay and sculpting as a tool for children to process their trauma. Daniel became her unofficial assistant, helping set up materials and document the kids' progress, watching with quiet awe as Lauren transformed from someone who hid her scars to someone who used them as a bridge to help others. The workshops became something of a revelation. Children who struggled to verbalize their pain and fear found release in molding clay, creating shapes and figures that expressed what words couldn't capture. Lauren taught them to make worry stones that they could hold when they felt anxious. She showed them how to sculpt hands reaching toward each other, representing connection and support. She guided them in creating masks, both literal and metaphorical, exploring the faces they showed the world versus the feelings they kept hidden. Parents began approaching Lauren after the workshops, thanking her with tears in their eyes for giving their children a safe outlet. Some of them were burn survivors themselves, carrying their own visible or invisible scars. A community began forming around these monthly gatherings, a network of people who understood trauma and survival in ways the outside world couldn't comprehend. It was late November, the workshops now in their third month, when Lauren approached Daniel with an idea that had been forming in her mind. They were cleaning up after a particularly emotional session where a young boy had sculpted a figure of himself with wings, explaining that the wings represented how he felt different from other kids. But maybe that difference made him special, instead of broken. "I want to do an exhibition," Lauren said, carefully packing away clay tools, "of my own work, the sculptures I've been making since the fire. And I want to include pieces from the kids, with their permission. I want to create a public display that shows burn survival not as tragedy, but as transformation." Daniel paused in his work, studying her face. "That's a big step. A public exhibition means a lot of visibility, a lot of people seeing your work, understanding where it comes from." "I know," Lauren replied, "and 6 months ago, the idea would have terrified me. But I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. You and these kids, this work we're doing, it's changed how I see myself. I want to share that. I want other survivors to see it and know they're not alone." "Then let's do it," Daniel said without hesitation. "What do you need from me? Help finding a venue, help with logistics, and moral support when I inevitably panic and try to back out." Daniel crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "You're not backing out. You're too stubborn for that. But I'll be there for every moment of panic anyway." Planning the exhibition consumed them through December and into early January. They found a small gallery space willing to donate their venue for a weekend. Lauren curated her personal pieces carefully, choosing works that told her story without being gratuitously graphic. The children's workshop participants were invited to contribute, and the response was overwhelming. Nearly every family wanted their child's work included, proud of the creative expression their kids had achieved. The exhibition was scheduled for the third weekend of January. As the date approached, Daniel noticed Lauren's anxiety increasing. She slept poorly, picked at her food, and cycled through moments of excitement and terror. He stayed close, offering reassurance without minimizing her fears, understanding that this public exposure of her most vulnerable self represented a massive risk. It was 3 days before the opening when everything nearly fell apart. Daniel was at the shop, buried in an engine rebuild that required his complete concentration, when his phone rang. Lauren's name flashed on the screen, and something in his gut told him to answer immediately. "I can't do this," she said without preamble, her voice tight with panic. "Daniel, I can't. I thought I could, but I was wrong. I need to cancel everything." "I need to—" "Where are you?" Daniel interrupted calmly, already reaching for his keys. "At the gallery. I came to do a final check of the installation and I saw all of it together. all my pain on display for strangers to judge and dissect, and I'm coming. Stay there. Don't make any decisions until I get there." He made the drive in record time, probably breaking several traffic laws in the process. The gallery was in a converted warehouse space downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting. He found Lauren sitting on the floor in the center of the main exhibition area, surrounded by her sculptures and the children's pieces, her face buried in her hands. Daniel didn't say anything immediately. He simply sat down beside her on the cold concrete floor and waited. After several minutes, Lauren spoke without lifting her head. "What if people see this and only see tragedy? What if all they take away is pity for the poor burned woman and her collection of broken children? Is that what you see when you look at these pieces?" Daniel asked gently. Lauren finally lifted her head, her eyes red from crying. She looked around at the sculptures surrounding them. Her own work, raw and powerful, depicting hands and faces and abstract forms that spoke to pain, transformed into art. The children's pieces, simpler but no less profound, each one telling a story of survival and hope. "No," she admitted quietly. "I see strength. I see people who refuse to let fire define them. I see beauty emerging from trauma." "Then trust that other people will see that too," Daniel urged. "Not everyone will understand. Some people will only see the surface. But the people who matter, the people who need to see this, they'll understand. They'll see exactly what you want them to see." Lauren leaned against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "What if I'm not ready? What if I'm still too broken to do this?" "You're not broken," Daniel said firmly. "You're healing. There's a difference. And healing isn't linear. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it hurts worse than the original injury. But you're doing it. Every day, you're doing it." They sat there on the gallery floor for over an hour, Daniel holding Lauren while she worked through her panic. Eventually, her breathing steadied. Her body relaxed incrementally. And when she finally stood up, brushing dust from her jeans, there was a new determination in her eyes. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we're doing this. I'm terrified, but we're doing this." The exhibition opening fell on a Saturday evening. Daniel picked Lauren up from her apartment, finding her dressed in dark pants and a flowing blouse with 3/4 sleeves, a compromise between protection and visibility. Her hands shook as she applied lipstick in the mirror, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. "You look beautiful," he told her honestly, "and you're going to be amazing tonight." The gallery was already filling with people when they arrived. Susan from the community center had promoted the event through their networks, and the turnout exceeded their modest expectations. Burn survivors and their families mingled with art enthusiasts and community supporters. Local press had even sent a photographer, interested in the human interest angle. Lauren froze in the doorway, overwhelmed by the crowd, but Daniel took her hand and squeezed gently. "One step at a time," he murmured. "You don't have to talk to everyone. You don't have to explain yourself. Just be present." They moved through the gallery together, Daniel serving as her anchor. People approached them with genuine interest and respect, asking thoughtful questions about the work and the inspiration behind it. Lauren answered haltingly at first, but gradually found her voice, found her confidence in articulating what this exhibition meant to her and to the community of survivors it represented. The most powerful moment came when Megan, the young girl from the community center, arrived with her parents. She was dressed in her finest clothes, a purple dress that matched the walls of the art room they had painted together. When she saw her sculpture displayed professionally, with a small placard bearing her name, her entire face lit up with joy. "Mom? Dad, look! My fire phoenix is in a real gallery." She turned to Lauren, practically vibrating with excitement. "Does this mean I'm a real artist now?" "You've always been a real artist," Lauren replied, kneeling down to her level. "This just means other people get to see what I already knew." Watching this exchange, Daniel felt his heart constrict with emotion. This was what Lauren had been working toward, perhaps without even realizing it. Not just her own healing, but the creation of something larger than herself. A space where survival could be celebrated, where scars could be reframed as symbols of strength rather than shame. As the evening wore on, Daniel observed Lauren's transformation. The nervous woman who had nearly canceled everything was replaced by someone confident and graceful, moving through the crowd with purpose. She still wore her sleeves, still maintained some protective barriers, but her entire demeanor had shifted. She was owning her story, claiming her experience, refusing to hide anymore. Near the end of the evening, an older woman approached Lauren. She was probably in her 60s, with visible scarring on her neck and hands. "I survived a house fire 40 years ago," she said quietly. "Back then, there was no therapy, no support groups, no art workshops. There was just shame and isolation. I've hidden myself for 4 decades." She gestured to the sculptures around them, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for this. Thank you for showing me that maybe it's not too late to stop hiding." Lauren embraced the woman without hesitation, and Daniel watched as they stood together, 2 survivors separated by decades but connected by shared experience. It was in that moment that he fully understood the magnitude of what Lauren had accomplished. This wasn't just an art exhibition, it was a declaration, a refusal to let trauma have the final word, a bridge between isolation and community. The gallery finally closed near midnight, the last visitors reluctantly departing. Daniel and Lauren stood alone in the space, surrounded by the sculptures that had terrified her just days before. She turned to him, exhaustion and exhilaration warring on her face. "We did it," she whispered. "I actually did it." "You did," Daniel confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "And you were magnificent." They drove back to his apartment in comfortable silence, both too emotionally drained for conversation. Inside, Lauren kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto his couch, pulling him down beside her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for staying when I tried to push you away, for being exactly what I needed, even when I didn't know what I needed." Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "You don't have to thank me for loving you, Lauren." The words hung in the air between them, significant and terrifying, and absolutely true. Daniel hadn't planned to say them, hadn't consciously decided this was the moment, but they had emerged anyway, undeniable and right. Lauren's eyes widened, filling with tears for what felt like the 100th time that day. "You love me?" "I love you," Daniel confirmed without hesitation. "I think I've loved you since that first afternoon at Natalie's house when you were brave enough to show me your scars. I just needed time to understand what I was feeling." "I love you too," Lauren breathed, the words tumbling out as if she had been holding them back for weeks. "I've been terrified to say it, terrified to admit it even to myself, but I love you. So much it scares me sometimes." They kissed then, deep and slow and full of promise. Not their first kiss, but somehow the most significant one. A kiss that acknowledged what they had built together, what they had survived, and what they were choosing to create going forward. The exhibition ran for 2 weekends, drawing larger crowds than anyone had anticipated. Local news picked up the story, running a feature on Lauren and the community center's art therapy program. The attention was overwhelming at times, pushing Lauren to the edges of her comfort zone, but Daniel remained her constant support, attending every public event and gently redirecting conversations when he saw her becoming exhausted by the emotional labor of repeatedly sharing her story. It was during the second weekend, on a quiet Sunday afternoon when foot traffic had slowed, that Lauren's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered hesitantly, stepping into a quiet corner of the gallery, while Daniel chatted with a couple examining one of the children's pieces. "Is this Lauren Moore?" a woman's voice asked, professional and warm. "Yes, this is she. My name is Dr. Patricia Harmon. I'm the Director of Pediatric Rehabilitation at County General Hospital. I attended your exhibition last weekend, and I've been thinking about your work ever since. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Lauren's heart began to race, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Of course. I was particularly struck by your art therapy approach with burn survivors," Dr. Harmon continued. "The way you use sculpting as a tool for processing trauma is exactly the kind of innovative thinking our rehabilitation program needs. We've been looking to expand our therapeutic offerings for pediatric burn patients, and I believe your expertise could be invaluable. Would you be interested in discussing a potential position with our hospital? It would be part-time initially, developing and leading art therapy sessions for our young patients." Lauren's breath caught in her throat. A real position. Professional recognition for work she had started as a desperate attempt at her own healing. I'm a nurse, not a trained art therapist. I'm aware of your nursing background, which actually makes you even more qualified. You understand the medical side of burn recovery, and you have lived experience that allows you to connect with patients in ways traditionally trained therapists cannot. We would support additional certification if needed, but honestly, Ms. Moore, what you've created speaks for itself. These children need someone who understands their journey from the inside. They talked for 20 minutes, Dr. Harmon outlining the position and what it would entail. By the time Lauren ended the call, her hands were shaking with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. She found Daniel immediately, pulling him aside and relaying the entire conversation in a breathless rush. "This is incredible," Daniel said, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Lauren, this is everything you've been working toward." "It's terrifying," she corrected, but she was smiling too. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't help them the way they need?" "You've already been helping them," Daniel reminded her. "Every Saturday at the community center, every workshop where kids leave with a little less fear and a little more hope. This is just making it official." Lauren accepted the position 2 weeks later, after a formal interview and a tour of the hospital's rehabilitation wing. She would start in March, giving her time to complete some basic art therapy certification courses online and to transition some of her nursing shifts to part-time. The change felt monumental, like her life was finally catching up with who she was becoming rather than remaining trapped in who the fire had left behind. February arrived with unexpected warmth, one of those false springs that made everyone forget winter wasn't quite finished. Daniel and Lauren were spending increasingly more time together, their relationship deepening in ways that felt both natural and miraculous. He kept a drawer at his apartment now, filled with clothes and toiletries. He had a key to her place, letting himself in on evenings when she worked late to leave dinner in her refrigerator or flowers on her table. They had fallen into the comfortable patterns of a real relationship, grocery shopping together on Sunday mornings, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to pick the movie, learning each other's quirks and habits and preferences. Daniel discovered that Lauren was obsessively organized about some things, like her art supplies, but completely chaotic about others, like her car, which was perpetually littered with empty coffee cups and hospital paperwork. Lauren learned that Daniel was deeply sentimental, keeping every card and small gift she gave him displayed on his dresser like treasures. But despite the growing intimacy and the declarations of love, there remained one barrier they hadn't crossed: physical intimacy beyond kissing and cuddling. Lauren had never explicitly said she wasn't ready, but Daniel could feel her hesitation whenever their embraces threatened to move beyond a certain point. He never pushed, never questioned, simply accepted whatever boundaries she needed to maintain. It was a Saturday evening in late February when everything shifted. They had spent the day at the community center, running a workshop that had been particularly emotional. A new child had joined the group, a 7-year-old girl named Emma, who had been burned in a car accident just 3 months earlier. She was still in the angry stage of grief, lashing out at everyone and refusing to participate. Lauren had sat with her patiently, not forcing engagement but simply being present, and by the end of the session, Emma had created a small clay figure of a girl with flames around her, explaining in a small voice that the fire was both hurting the girl and protecting her because it meant no one could get too close. The workshop had gutted both of them emotionally, confronting them with the reality that healing was never a straight line, that some survivors would struggle for years or decades with the aftermath of their trauma. They drove back to Daniel's apartment in subdued silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Inside, Daniel poured them each a glass of wine, and they settled onto the couch in the dim light of early evening. Lauren curled against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. They stayed like that for a long time, the silence between them comfortable and full of unspoken understanding. "I've been thinking," Lauren said eventually, her voice quiet, "about us, about what comes next." Daniel's hand stilled where it had been absently stroking her hair. "Okay." She sat up, turning to face him with an expression that was equal parts vulnerable and determined. "I want to be with you, completely, in every way, but I'm scared, Daniel. Not of you, but of myself, of what you'll see, of how you'll react when you see all of me." Understanding dawned slowly. "Lauren, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she interrupted gently. "But I want to. I'm tired of this being the last wall between us. I'm tired of my scars having this much power over my life." She took a shaky breath. "The burns don't just cover my arm. They go across my shoulder, down my side, across part of my back. It's extensive, and I've never let anyone see all of it. Not since the hospital. Not even in group therapy. Just me and my mirror, and I avoid that as much as possible." Daniel reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We can take this at whatever pace you need. There's no rush, no pressure. I know, but I'm ready, or as ready as I'm going to be." She stood up, her hand trembling in his. "Come with me." He followed her to his bedroom, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and profound tenderness. Lauren stood near the bed, the last light of day filtering through the curtains and casting everything in soft shadow. She looked at him with eyes that held both fear and trust, asking a silent question. "I'm here," Daniel said quietly. "Whatever you need, I'm here." Lauren nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and reached for the hem of her sweater. She pulled it over her head in one swift motion, revealing the tank top underneath and the familiar scarring on her right arm. But she didn't stop there. With trembling fingers, she grasped the straps of the tank top and slowly, deliberately, pulled it down and off. Daniel's breath left his body in a rush. The scarring was extensive, just as she had warned. It covered her entire right arm, wrapped across her shoulder, and painted patterns down her right side and across portions of her back. The skin was a patchwork of textures and tones, raised in some places, smooth and shiny in others, telling the story of multiple surgeries and skin grafts and healing that had required extraordinary endurance. But what Daniel saw, more than the scars, more than the physical evidence of trauma, was Lauren. Brave, beautiful, impossibly strong Lauren, standing before him in the most vulnerable position a person could occupy, trusting him with the parts of herself she had hidden from the world. "Say something," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, say something." Daniel moved to her slowly, giving her time to stop him if she wanted. When he reached her, he raised his hands and gently, reverently, placed them on her shoulders, one on each side. His right hand rested on smooth, unmarked skin. His left hand covered scarred tissue, the texture different, but no less her, no less precious. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Lauren, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling through them. "You're not just saying that? I have never meant anything more in my entire life." He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her scarred shoulder. Tender and deliberate. "Every part of you. Beautiful." Strong, survivor, fighter, mine. What followed was tender and slow, and full of a gentleness that brought tears to both their eyes. Daniel took his time, learning every inch of her, treating her scarred skin with the same reverence as her unmarked skin, showing her through touch and words and presence that she was wholly, completely loved. Lauren cried through much of it, overwhelmed by the vulnerability and the acceptance, by the reality that someone could see all of her, the damaged parts and the whole parts, and choose her anyway. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Lauren's scarred arm draped across Daniel's chest, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her back. She felt lighter somehow, as if the act of being fully seen and fully accepted had lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what? For not running, for staying, for loving me exactly as I am." Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I told you on the very first day. I'm not going anywhere." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in 3 years, Lauren slept through the night without nightmares. The weeks that followed brought a settling, a deepening of their connection that felt inevitable and right. Lauren started her new position at the hospital in March, nervous but excited to begin this next chapter. Her first day, Daniel sent flowers to the rehabilitation wing with a card that read simply, "Proud of you, always." The art therapy sessions exceeded even Dr. Harmon's expectations. Lauren had a gift for connecting with the children, for creating a safe space where they could express their trauma and fear without judgment. Parents reported behavioral improvements in their kids, better sleep, fewer outbursts, a gradual return of joy that had been buried under pain and anger. In April, the community center asked Lauren to expand her workshops to twice monthly, and she agreed, energized by the work rather than depleted by it. She and Daniel settled into a routine where he attended every session he could, helping set up materials and clean up afterward, content to exist in the background while she worked her quiet magic with the children. It was a warm evening in May, nearly 6 months since that first awkward meeting at Natalie's house, when Daniel made a decision. He and Lauren were at his apartment, cooking dinner together in the easy way of people who had learned each other's rhythms. She was chopping vegetables while he seasoned chicken, and they were debating the merits of different pasta shapes with the kind of mock seriousness that made them both laugh. "I need to tell you something," Daniel said, setting down the spice jar and turning to face her fully. Lauren looked up, immediately alert to the shift in his tone. "Okay. My mother called this morning. She wants us to come visit. She's been asking about you constantly since I told her about us, and she wants to meet you properly." He paused, gauging her reaction. "I know that's a big step, meeting family, and if you're not ready—" "I want to meet her," Lauren interrupted, a smile spreading across her face. "Daniel, of course I want to meet your mother." "Yeah? Yeah. When?" "Next weekend, if you're free. It's about a 2-hour drive to her place. Small town, very quiet, very different from the city. She's already planning to cook enough food to feed an army. Tell her I'm looking forward to it." The following Saturday, they made the drive to Daniel's hometown, a rural community where everyone knew everyone, and the pace of life moved at a deliberate crawl. His mother's house was a modest ranch-style home with a wraparound porch and a garden that was clearly her pride and joy. She emerged before Daniel even fully parked the truck, a woman in her early 60s with her son's eyes and a smile that radiated warmth. "You must be Lauren," Elise Cavill said, pulling Lauren into a hug before she could even introduce herself properly. "I've heard so much about you. Daniel talks about nothing else lately. Come in, come in. I just pulled a pie from the oven." Inside, the house was filled with the smell of home cooking and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. Family photos covered every surface, including several of young Daniel, that made Lauren's heart ache with affection for the skinny, serious boy he had been. Elise was as warm and accepting as Daniel had promised, treating Lauren not with pity or excessive curiosity, but with genuine interest in who she was as a person. They talked for hours over dinner, Elise sharing embarrassing stories about Daniel's childhood while he groaned in protest. Lauren found herself relaxing completely, laughing freely, feeling welcomed in a way she hadn't experienced since before the fire took her own family. At one point, while Daniel was helping clear dishes, Elise reached across the table and gently touched Lauren's scarred arm where it rested on the tablecloth. "You're a strong one," she said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes. Whatever you've been through, it didn't break you. It made you into someone remarkable." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know. My son is lucky to have found you, but I think you're pretty lucky too. He's been waiting his whole life for someone who sees him, really sees him, and I think you do." "I do," Lauren confirmed. "I absolutely do." They drove back to the city that evening with full stomachs and fuller hearts, Daniel's hand clasped with Lauren's across the center console. She was quiet for most of the drive, processing the day, before finally speaking as the city lights came into view. "I want you to move in with me," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Or I could move in with you, or we could find a new place together. I don't care which. I just know that I don't want to keep splitting our time between two apartments. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a life together. A real life, not this halfway thing we've been doing." Daniel pulled the truck over to the side of the road, surprising her. He put it in park and turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Are you sure? That's a big step. I've never been more sure of anything. Daniel, you've shown me what it means to be truly loved, to be accepted completely, scars and all. You've helped me reclaim parts of myself I thought the fire had destroyed forever. I don't want to waste any more time being careful or protecting myself from hypothetical future hurt. I want to choose us every single day." "Then yes," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's find a place together. Start fresh. Build something that's ours." They spent the next month house hunting, looking for a space that felt right for both of them. Not too big, but with room for Lauren's art studio and enough space to eventually host the community center kids for small group sessions. They found it in early June, a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood halfway between Daniel's shop and Lauren's hospital. 2 bedrooms, an open floor plan, a small backyard that got good afternoon light. Moving in together was chaotic and exhausting and perfect. They painted walls and assembled furniture and argued about where things should go. Daniel's tools found a home in the garage. Lauren's sculptures claimed the second bedroom, transforming it into a bright studio space. They hung photos on the walls, a mixture of his family and memories they were creating together. The place slowly became theirs, filled with the evidence of 2 lives merging into one shared journey. It was a Saturday evening in late July, the height of summer heat making them grateful for air conditioning, when Daniel found Lauren in her studio. She was working on a new piece, a sculpture that depicted 2 hands reaching toward each other, their fingers just touching, the space between them charged with possibility. She had been working on it for weeks, unable to quite get it right, but now it was nearly finished. "That's beautiful," Daniel said from the doorway. Lauren looked up, clay-covered and smiling. "It's us, or it's supposed to be. The moment when 2 people reach for each other despite their fear. When they choose connection over safety." Daniel walked over and examined the piece more closely. She had captured something essential in the clay, a tenderness and vulnerability that spoke to the courage required to love after loss. "It's perfect," he said. "Just like you." "I'm not perfect," Lauren protested automatically. "No," Daniel agreed. "Neither am I. But we're perfect for each other, and that's what matters." They stood together in the studio, surrounded by clay and tools and the physical evidence of Lauren's healing journey. And Daniel knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where he was supposed to be, not despite the challenges they had faced, but because of them. Every moment of doubt, every test of their commitment, every wall they had torn down together had brought them to this point. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words emerging without planning, but feeling absolutely right. Lauren's hands stilled on the sculpture, her eyes going wide. "What?" "Marry me," Daniel repeated, more confident now. "I know it's sudden. I know we've only been together 7 months. But Lauren, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to spend every day choosing you. I want to build a family with you, however that looks. I want to grow old with you and watch you help hundreds of kids find their way through trauma. I want all of it, everything, with you." "I don't have a ring," she started, but Daniel cut her off. "I don't care about a ring. I care about you, about us, about this life we're building together." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "Unless you're saying no, which is completely okay. There's no pressure. I just needed you to know." "Yes," Lauren interrupted, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Daniel. Of course, yes. 1,000 times, yes." He pulled her into his arms, clay-covered hands and all, and kissed her with a depth of feeling that made them both shake. When they finally pulled apart, Lauren was leaving clay handprints on his shirt, and neither of them cared at all. "We should probably tell people," Lauren said eventually, breathless and grinning. "Natalie is going to lose her mind." "Natalie is going to say she knew it all along," Daniel corrected. "She's been predicting this since day one." They called Natalie together, putting her on speakerphone, and her shriek of joy was so loud they had to hold the phone away from their ears. She demanded they come over immediately so she could celebrate with them properly. And they agreed, still giddy and slightly disbelieving of what had just happened. But before they left, Daniel stopped Lauren at the door, turning her to face him. "I meant what I said. Every word. You're the bravest, strongest, most incredible person I've ever known. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget it." "I love you," Lauren said simply. "Even on the days when I don't know how to love myself, I love you." "That's okay," Daniel replied. "On those days, I'll love you enough for both of us, until you remember how." 3 months later, on a perfect October afternoon, they were married in a small ceremony at the community center, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Natalie served as maid of honor, weeping openly through the entire ceremony. Elise sat in the front row, beaming with pride. The children from the art therapy workshops attended, dressed in their finest clothes, serving as enthusiastic, if slightly chaotic witnesses to the vows. Lauren wore a dress with 3/4 sleeves, a compromise that felt right. She hadn't hidden her scars completely, but she hadn't forced herself to be more exposed than was comfortable. It was her choice, made from a place of self-acceptance rather than shame, and that made all the difference. During the ceremony, when it came time for their personal vows, Daniel spoke first. "I promise to see you, always, on the good days and the hard days, when you're strong and when you're struggling. I promise to choose you every single day, to be your anchor when the storms come, and to celebrate with you when the sun breaks through. You showed me what real courage looks like, what real strength means, and I will spend my life trying to deserve the gift of your love." Lauren's vows were shorter, her voice shaking with emotion. "You stayed when everyone else ran. You looked at my scars and saw beauty. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I promise to keep fighting, to keep healing, to keep showing up for this life we're building together. I promise to love you with everything I have, even the broken parts, especially the broken parts. Because you taught me that broken things can still be whole." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The reception was held in the same space where they had painted the art room nearly a year ago, the walls still bright with purple, blue, and yellow. They danced to music that was too loud, ate cake that was too sweet, and laughed until their faces hurt. Megan made a speech about how Lauren was a real-life princess who had defeated the dragon and found her prince, and the metaphor was awkward but heartfelt enough to make everyone tear up again. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Daniel and Lauren found themselves alone on the small patio behind the center, looking up at stars that were barely visible through the city light pollution. Lauren leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and Daniel wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "I didn't think I could be," Lauren admitted. "After the fire, after losing my parents, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people, that I was fundamentally broken in a way that made joy impossible. But Daniel, I'm so happy it almost scares me. Not because I think it will be taken away, but because I never knew life could feel like this." "Me too," Daniel said. "I spent so many years believing I wasn't enough, that I would always be the invisible kid from the poor family. And then you saw me, really saw me, and suddenly I was enough, more than enough." They stood together in the darkness, two people who had been marked by fire, hers literal, his metaphorical, who had found each other and chosen to build something beautiful from their shared understanding of pain. They weren't perfect. They still had hard days, moments when old fears resurfaced, nights when nightmares intruded. But they faced those challenges together, with honesty and compassion and the unwavering commitment to keep showing up for each other. "Ready to go home?" Daniel asked eventually. "Home," Lauren repeated, the word tasting sweet on her tongue. "Yes, let's go home." They drove through the quiet city streets, hands clasped, two people who had survived their separate hells and found heaven in each other. And if anyone had asked them in that moment what they had learned, what wisdom they could offer from their journey, they would have said this: healing isn't about erasing scars or forgetting pain. It's about learning to carry both while still reaching for joy. It's about having the courage to trust again, to love again, to believe that good things can happen even after terrible things have tried to destroy you. It's about finding someone who sees your broken parts and loves you, not despite them, but with them. Because those broken parts are what make you human, what make you real, what make you capable of the kind of deep, transformative love that changes everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, healing looks like a mechanic with calloused hands and a nurse with scarred skin, building a life together, one brave choice at a time. Learning that the question was never whether they deserved love, but whether they were courageous enough to accept it when it finally arrived. They were, and that made all the difference. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.